Hello, everyone. Today I have a special guest, Mitch Messer, aka the real estate engineer, on the show. Thank you very much, Mitch. How are you doing?
Olaf, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm
Glad.
excited.
Yes, I'm very excited. We want to hear your story, so let's just get started. Could you introduce yourself? Where you're from? What are you doing?
Sure. So, my name is Mitch Messer. I am originally from New York City, New York, born and raised in the Bronx, and I am now a full-time real estate investor. I've had kind of an interesting career path. I started off as an engineer by training. Went to the mecca of nerds, MIT, with an engineering degree. Left there, worked for AT&T for about 8 or 9 years in the Bell Labs division. And as much as I loved the technical stuff, it was clear to me that I kind of like interacting with people. I didn't realize that when I first started studying engineering, but toward the end, I started to realize that I enjoyed interacting with people. And I also became more aware of the fact that the real money that's made in business is made by people who interact with people more than machines and software and such. So I started making the transition, or started considering entrepreneurship, and I left AT&T, I want to say it was 92, maybe, and did some internet things for a while, and then got out of the internet thing just before the market collapsed in 1999. So I got to watch a little bit of that from the sidelines. And then in 1999, my wife and I decided to take some bold steps forward in real estate. We had both had an interest in real estate. We decided to both pursue it. And so we started doing our first deals in 1999, and primarily in residential buy and hold. Our preference was lease purchase. We can talk more about that if you'd like later. And specifically seller financing. So I guess my claim to fame is that we started investing in 1999. At this point, we've probably done somewhere between $15 and $20 million in real estate deals. We have never, ever gone to a bank to borrow money to acquire investment real estate. We've gone to a bank to refinance, but we have always purchased with either seller financing or a flavor of seller financing called subject to, or private money. Wow. So my instinct is not to go to a bank to get funding to do a deal. My instinct is to figure out how we can create the financing that we need from the deal. I don't like banks. I've seen what banks can do when they get scared and nervous. We saw that in 2007. So I prefer not to tie my success and my future to working with banks. And we can talk more about that as well. So from 1999, we accumulated, I think, depending on how you add it up, by 2006, we had somewhere between $7 to $10 million in real estate portfolio, rental income. And then the downturn, otherwise known as the Great Recession, took place, and we got crushed. We got totally crushed. And one of the main reasons why we got crushed is because I did not understand our numbers, which is entirely embarrassing for an engineer because the math is not that hard. It's not that I didn't know how to do it. I just didn't feel the need to do it because the market was going great. Everybody was a genius from 1999 to 2006 because the market was going up. Everybody was making money. And then the market shifted, and many of us could not shift with it. And so we got destroyed, frankly. And we spent from 2007 till about 2014, 15, 16, licking our wounds, recovering, digging out of the hole that we had created. It wasn't much fun, but we did learn a lot. We are on the road to recovery. We're back to acquiring real estate. We've done a bunch of deals since then. We are way smarter about how we pursue deals. And I'd say about 10, maybe 12 years ago, I got approached by an investor out of the country. He was at the time in Namibia. I had to look up where Namibia was, but in Africa. And he was looking to build a portfolio of rental properties in the U.S. He had started in Memphis, as I recall. He was looking to do the same thing in Atlanta. And so we started working with him to help him build his portfolio. And I discovered that I actually liked working with international clients. I actually like working with international clients more than I like working with locals. And so we started focusing on helping overseas and out-of-state investors do what we had done, which was build a portfolio of rental properties. So that's kind of what I specialize in these days. I do work with some local investors, but my favorite thing to do is to help overseas investors build a rental portfolio in the U.S. That produces wonderful cash flows. So that brings us to here now. I'm actually in Medellin, Colombia. My wife and I guess as of 2018, we became officially digital nomads. We can do what we do from anywhere in the world. And so we happened to have been living in Tulsa, Oklahoma in December of this year. And we looked at each other and said, we're cold, we're miserable. Why are we here in Tulsa, Oklahoma? We love Tulsa, but at the time it was really cold. Let's go someplace where it's nice and more temperate. And Medellin, Colombia is, it's called the city of the eternal spring because it's always springtime here. It's always between, at least Fahrenheit, about 55 and about 75, 80. It's perfect weather. And it's beautiful. The people are friendly. The exchange rate is very favorable for the dollar. It's like nearly 5,000 pesos per dollar, and it keeps going up. So your dollar goes really, really far here. And so we've been here now since the first week or so in January. And our plan is to stay here at least for another 2 months, maybe longer, because we love it here. And so, and when we leave here, we're probably not going to spend much more time in the U.S. We'll probably look at some other cities. I have my eye on Beijing and possibly Singapore. But again, as long as they have internet access and electricity, we can pretty much do our deals from anywhere in the world. I'm doing deals now in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in Atlanta, Georgia, and Augusta, Georgia. So we're not bound by the kind of deals we can do. So that's pretty much my life. I love what I do. I love talking about real estate, and I love helping people use real estate as a vehicle too, if they want to live the nomadic lifestyle. It's not for everybody, but it is nice to know that you can do a deal that here in Colombia at least covers, 4 or 5 months worth of expenses. A single small deal here. But as I guess Tim Ferriss points out, if you can earn in dollars and spend in pesos, then
you live the life.
Yeah, exactly. It always is going to be in your favor. So that's pretty much what we do, and I'm happy to be here to talk to you and your guests. I mean, your listeners.
I have so many questions. I would say you're a real estate veteran, starting in 1999, all the way here. You've seen it all. How did you get in the first place into real estate? How did you roll into the industry?
So we had, as a lot of people did, we started reading Rich Dad Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, and he talks a lot about real estate. And we had known for a while that real estate was one of the gateways to generational wealth, my wife and I. While we have no kids, we didn't mind the idea of creating something that would outlast us in terms of real estate. So we were both on the same page that it was something we wanted to do. And in 1999, having just left the internet business, I had plenty of spare time, and we thought that was a good time to pursue it. What I like most about real estate is that it is, for me, a microcosm of the business world at large. You learn a little bit about legal and about accounting, and about marketing and sales. It lets you. It's a gateway into the larger business world. But you can start on a very small scale, and you can start to assemble your team when the numbers are small, so that when you get to larger numbers, you already have an established, solid team of folks that you can work with. You've got a banker, you've got an accountant, you've got an attorney. So I like that aspect of real estate. Again, in 2000, there were lots of people teaching real estate. We have spent a small fortune in real estate training to understand how to do some of the things that we do, and they made sense, and we tried them, and they worked, and so we just kept doing them. And so that was, again, I wish someone had told me, or maybe someone tried and I just didn't listen, but I wish someone had explained to me how important it was to understand cash on cash return and cash flow and why it's important to understand those numbers, return on equity and such. But that was a lesson that we had to learn. But the other lessons we did learn, and we used them to good effect.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, those times were different. Early 2000s, there was way less information available on the internet as now. Well, you have these big communities like Bigger Pockets. That's where we met, actually.
Right.
And there's so much information about real estate available, such as a podcast like this, many books. And in those early days, for me, I don't know, but I guess it was like real estate is more for those rich old people and not for the younger investor.
Well, I'd like to say that, although in honesty, I mean, I understood. If you had asked me in 2004 if I knew what cash on cash return was, I might have been able to hand wave it a little bit, but I didn't really spend a lot of time understanding not only how to calculate it, but why it's important or why cash flow is important. And what ended up causing our demise is in 2007, pretty much all the markets in the U.S. contracted, which meant simultaneously property values pulled back. So I think we on average lost about 25% of the equity in property. But at the same time, rents pulled back. So things that were renting for $1,000, you could now only get $800 for. And so if you're only operating at $100 cash flow and you lose $200, you're now negative. And if you had known that we were only at 100, we would have done what we needed to do to either bolster that or get rid of those properties that were marginal. But I didn't take the time to know. And I can't really excuse myself because the math was there in 2006 and 1999. And we worked with people who had been doing it even back then, had been doing it for 30, 40 years, had been doing it since the 70s. And that's where we learned our real estate skills from. So we knew that there were people out there who were doing it right. It's just, and I see a lot of this behavior happening right now. And I think you and I may have said this, may have had this conversation. There are people in the market right now in real estate who have been operating for 10 years, who have never seen a down market because we haven't had a down market in the last 10 years, at least not in the United States. And so there are people out there who think that they're geniuses because for a decade, they've been making money hand over fist. And it's just that the market's been good. It's only when the market goes sideways or south that you see who really understands what they're doing and who is just riding the wave. And that's what happened in 2007. And I think it's about to happen again. I don't think it'll be exactly the same as back then, but there's definitely an evolution, at least in the U.S. The economy is slowing. The Fed is probably going to continue to slow things down. So my bigger point is that a true investor can make money whether the market's going up or the market's going down. We made money when the market was going up, and a lot of people have made money in the last 10 years since the market has been going up. The question is, will they continue to make money when the market stays flat or pulls back a little bit? And I think some of those folks are not prepared for the reality that markets do sometimes go down. And again, if you've been operating for the last decade, you've never seen that. So you don't really believe that it's possible. We learned the hard way in 2007 that it was in fact possible. So,
they say run your numbers well. Make sure you have a good cash flowing property, and not just like the income minus the expenses minus your mortgage and no reserves, no capex. That's where you that's where the mistakes happen.
Yep, I hear people all the time. They run their numbers, and I say, let me take a look at your net operating income, and they go, wait, where's property management? Oh, we're managing it ourselves. Well, sadly, managing it yourself doesn't make that expense go away. It just simply means that you're doing the work as opposed to hiring a property manager. But property management is an expense, whether you do it or whether you hire someone to do it. And the costs, in many cases, when you do it yourself, are higher because in many cases, the people who are doing it don't know what they're doing. So they spend more than they should be on property management. So things like that. Or you don't have vacancy in their numbers. Well, again, vacancy is a reality. We'd all choose, if we could, not to have vacancy, but that's not something we can choose. It is a reality of rental real estate that you're going to have some vacancy. So again, these are mistakes that I made and that I see people make now. And you can make them when the market is going great. But when the market starts to pull back and everybody's not making money so easily, the people who ran their numbers without management, without vacancy, discover the hard way that their cash flow is really not positive and it's actually negative. And then when the market turns south, it becomes even more negative. And again, as I've said before, having one or two properties where you're not being careful is painful, but not necessarily devastating. I think at our peak, we had somewhere like 50 properties. And so if you've got 50 negatively cash flowing properties, it doesn't take very long before you're in really, really serious trouble. And that's kind of where we were.
And how did you get back from that? Because that must be very difficult at those times.
Yeah, it was painful. We were at one point $6 million in debt between institutional debt and private lender debt. And we, over the span of 4 years, paid off $4 million of that in debt. So $1 million a year in debt reduction. And we did that by selling properties, by acquiring new properties. It required being a lot more disciplined about how we did our deals. And we have learned the lesson. I've gone from being someone who ignored their numbers in the early parts of their career to now I'm almost a zealot when it comes to the numbers, because I know what happens if you don't pay attention to them. And so I beg people now to run their numbers, to run them conservatively. Even in the last 10 years, I've heard people saying things like, well, you can tolerate a little bit of negative cash flow because the market's going to be fun. Well, no, you can't. You can until you can't, right? You can do that until the market turns. But if you're carrying 10 negatively cash flowing properties in the hopes that things are going to get better, that's a recipe for disaster. And if you did that 5 years ago, then the market bailed you out. And a lot of people will walk away from that thinking, well, I made the right decision. I did this negative cash flow thing. The market bailed me out, so I'm a genius. No, you just got lucky. And if you pull that now, when the market is flattening out a little bit, you're going to get crushed. And so we have that bias where the thing that worked for us in the past, we think, well, that's the thing that made us successful. When in some cases, it wasn't that thing. It was the fact that the market was going up. And that thing, we actually were successful in spite of the bad decision that we made. So things like negatively cash flowing properties, which almost always are a bad idea, but you can get away with it when the market is rapidly increasing. You just can't get away with it under normal circumstances. And there were markets in the U.S. that were seeing double-digit appreciation year after year after year after year, and that's just not normal. I mean, that's great when it happens, but there are people who thought, well, that's just the way it works. And no, that's the way it works in that part of the cycle, but it is a cycle. And so it involved a lot of pain and suffering on our part, a lot of talking to private lenders and restructuring debt. And we're not done yet. I mean, to be perfectly honest, we're still digging out of that hole. But our commitment is to pay every single dime that we owed to the people that we owed it to. And it would have been easier to just walk away from it, but that's just not who we want to be. And so we have committed to making that.
Yeah,
good about that.
I just wanted to say that, like, it says something about you as a person, because most people would have just thrown the towel in the ring. Like, no, real estate, if you're a couple million in debt, like real estate, that's not, like, I tried it, but it didn't work out well. It's nothing for me. But you went on, and like now you're like building up your business. So I have to give you that. That's quite. You went down, but you didn't give up. So that's an accomplishment.
Yeah, we're taking our medicine. We are doing our best to help other people avoid the mistakes that we made, because they are entirely avoidable, and just helping people appreciate that this is a cycle. Things don't go up forever. They don't go down forever either. But we should be flexible and understand how the market works, so that we don't get ourselves caught in a bad situation when things change.
Yeah, definitely agree. So what kind of properties you're buying, or what did you buy? Residential, commercial? What's your sweet spot?
Our sweet spot's actually evolving. Our core has always been residential real estate. I love that just because since 2007, there has not been enough construction of affordable rental property in the U.S., pretty much anywhere. So there's a massive deficit in housing in the U.S. And that means that for the next 10, 15 years, it's going to be a good time to be a landlord because there's going to be way more demand than there is supply. So I like the idea of residential real estate. We have started looking at multifamily just because it gives you all the benefits of single family. But my favorite part about multifamily is that the management can be passed off onto somebody else cost effectively. And you typically have much more hands-on, on-site management that can kind of address things in real time. Whereas with a single-family house, you don't have the handyman living next door that can come and fix things. So it's harder to have a really good property management solution for single-family housing. It's not impossible. It's just challenging. It's a lot easier to have it for multifamily because you have critical mass. You got 100-unit, 200-unit. You're going to have on-site management, and if you can get great people in place, then you can run that thing like a well-oiled machine. I do like the idea of, or rather, let's say I have dabbled in some light commercial, industrial. I've got a company that's looking for warehouse space in Metro Atlanta that I'm trying to help them identify, ideally with seller financing. That's their preference. And I'd say if there is one aspect that ties together all the things that we do, it is the seller financing angle. It's the idea that, and this is something I know we wanted to talk about, that in the U.S., and I've learned by talking to international investors that this is pretty much a uniquely U.S. thing. In the
Definitely.
U.S., it is not uncommon, not super common, but it's not impossible to have a scenario where the seller, rather than getting all their equity at closing, will be willing to accept some of their equity at closing and then payments on the balance of their equity over some period of time. And we call that seller financing. And in those situations, there are definite benefits, potential benefits for the seller from a tax standpoint, from a cash management standpoint. And there are clear benefits to us as the buyer because it means instead of buying a $100,000 property for $100,000 in cash or getting a loan for $100,000, I can buy that property by giving the seller, say, $10,000 in down payment, and then the remaining $90,000 in balance, I can pay them over time, so they become the bank. And so rather than getting a bank involved, the bank becomes effectively the seller. And that's great for the seller because they can, in some cases, get a much better return than they could have gotten on that money if they just got it all in cash and then try to invest it in something new. It's great for us because it minimizes the amount of cash out of pocket that we have to put into a deal. And best of all, it means that we don't have to deal with banks. And I would much rather deal with an individual where I can structure the deal the way I'd like it to be structured. And also, most people don't realize that when they get bank financing, they're almost always giving a personal guarantee to that bank. So if things go sideways and you have to give up that property to the bank in lieu of foreclosure, the bank has the right, if they're not being made fully whole by the sale, to go after your personal assets because you've signed a personal guarantee. With a seller financing arrangement, we don't ever offer personal guarantee. We typically offer what's called the non-recourse note, which means the worst thing they can do is take the property back. And for them, taking the property back isn't so scary because it was their property to start with. So
Anyway,
they know it, they love it. And so it's not their preference, but if they had to get it back, it's not a catastrophe. So the whole seller finance piece has been our stock and trade. It's what we love to do. It's fast, it's cheap. There are no junk fees. I'm not paying an application fee and an appraisal fee and today is Tuesday fee. I'm paying none of those fees. I'm not typically surrendering my credit for inspection by the seller because they care less about my credit. They get if anything happens and I default on this seller financing, they get to keep my $10,000. This is an example. In states like Georgia, they get to foreclose in a month, so they get the property back fairly quickly, which they can then sell to somebody else. But my $10,000
and they have their down payment, so
right.
No much
so
risk.
they in many ways they make more money. They do better off if we default than if we pay them on time.
Yeah.
And so now, so my bigger point is that the seller financing is a really powerful strategy because it's gold for us buyers. But there are also lots of sellers right now who are in a position where they're far better off doing a seller finance deal than getting cash. And my favorite example of that is, let's just take right now. You have a landlord that's got 10 properties. Each property is $100,000. They own them free and clear. If you buy that entire portfolio, that's $1 million to that landlord. It sounds impressive, but okay, what happens the day after closing? They have $1 million sitting in a bank someplace. Bank rates right now are less than 1% savings rate. So if you keep it in the bank, you're going to be vastly underperforming. If you put it in the stock market, at least in the U.S. stock market, you're probably going to lose money. Bitcoin, you're going to lose money. I mean, there aren't very many places that you can put $1 million that will give you a decent return. And also, a lot of these folks are older folks who want this money to last them for the rest of their lives. So they're not going to do anything speculative. They don't want to do anything speculative with this money. They would much rather have a nice, steady income stream, because that's why they were landlords in the first place. So we're basically giving them all they wanted in the first place, which is a nice, steady income stream. But instead of being a landlord and having to chase after tenants who may or may not pay you, they're now a lender, and there's no chasing involved. If we don't pay them, they foreclose and they take the property back. So this gives them what they wanted in the first place, plus a little bit of cash up front, and a nice, steady, reliable income stream secured by an asset they already know and love. So for them, for the seller, it's in many ways superior to getting cash. And to us, it's vastly superior to working with the bank. So it's a marriage that both parties benefit from.
Works perfect. And do you do lowball offers, or do you just give them the regular price to make them more happy? Or
yeah, that's the great part about it, is that because we're structuring the financing in a way that benefits us, we don't have to lowball them on the price. I'm happy to buy that $1 million portfolio for the full $1 million that it's worth. Because if I get to set the terms, I almost don't care about the price. The joke
if it's cash flowing well.
Right. If it's cash flowing well, and if since the cash flow is going to be impacted by the debt that I'm servicing, if I structure it so that my payments to the seller, the debt service payments, are reasonable, then I get to control how well it cash flows. So as an example, the last deal that I did in Tulsa, which was November, December, it was a joint venture deal with myself and a business partner. The seller was a landlord that has multiple properties, and she wanted to sell this one with seller financing. We bought it from her with seller financing. I think the arrangement was it was about $76,000 is what we bought it from her for. Down payment was $15,000, and the interest on that was 3%. 3%. And again, at the time, prevailing rates were like double that.
Yeah.
But she was happy to get it because from a cash flow standpoint, it was more than she was getting as a landlord with none of the hassle. Because again, now she's not getting called when there's an issue with the toilets or she's not going to have any tenant problems. She gets no calls. She gets the same calls that a Wells Fargo gets, which is to say none. The bank gets no calls. So no calls, no hassle, steady income. She loved that deal. And so those are the kinds of deals that we're looking to do more of. And demographically speaking, right now in the U.S., there is the baby boom is working their way through the U.S. And the youngest baby boomer is my age. I'll be 59 this year, so it's 1964. To the oldest is 1946, which is about 20 years older. So between 60 and 80, you've got this large cohort of people that have property that are transitioning out of being active landlords, and they're selling. And in many cases, if we can get to them quickly enough, they're selling with owner financing because of all the benefits we just described. So if we can find those folks and can convert them from being landlords to being lenders effectively with seller financing, they love it. We love it. Everybody wins. They've got a nice big portfolio that we can transition to our ownership. We can keep those properties for ourselves. We can wrap the financing and make that available to other investors who aren't as skilled as we are in structuring the financing. So there's plenty of things we can do with those deals, and that's actually what I'm looking for right now. I'm looking for as many of those as I can, because over the next 10, 20 years, there's going to be, they claim, the largest transfer of wealth in at least U.S. history, if not world history, as this baby boom generation sells their assets to the next generations. And I want to be there to get some of those assets.
To take part of it.
Exactly right.
Yeah, and there's this thing that most people say, like, oh, for seller financing, the property needs to be no mortgage, so debt free. But you also have this subject to. Could you do I say it correct?
Yeah.
I'm not an expert, but I've read something about it. Could you?
Yeah. So we have done a number of subject to deals. So yes, there are two flavors of seller financing. One where the seller has no debt, which is nice and clean and easy. You're just structuring the financing the way you want it, the way all parties agree, and you're done. If the property has debt, then another option is to buy the property literally subject to the existing debt. So let's say it's a $100,000 property that happens to have $80,000 in debt still on it. So one way that I could buy that property is to pay $100,000, pay off that debt, and the seller gets the $20,000 in between. However, a lot of the debt that's hanging around right now is really quality debt because interest rates in the U.S. have been so low for so long. So rather than paying off that 3% debt to go borrow 6% debt, which makes no sense, why not keep that 3% debt in place and just make the payments on that? So if, in the case we just gave, that $100,000 property, let's say the $80,000 mortgage that it's got is 3% long-term debt, rather than paying that off, why not just keep that in place and just take on the responsibility of making those payments to whoever that lender was? Let's just say it was Wells Fargo. So instead of the seller making those monthly payments, now we're going to make those monthly payments to Wells Fargo. And as long as Wells Fargo gets their money each month, honestly, they don't care where the check's coming from. So subject to simply means buying that property. And it is a sale, right? This is not a lease. This is a sale. I get the deed, but the mortgage remains in the name of the seller. I take on the responsibility of making those monthly payments. And if I can do that, the seller could still get the same $20,000 net that they were going to get before, except I get to keep a nice low interest rate mortgage that's cheaper than I could get right now, which is a win for me.
Awesome. Yeah, we like in Europe, it's not as popular as in the United States. I don't like in Netherlands. I haven't heard many people talking about it. In Spain, we have some seller financing deals, but shorter time periods, like up to 5 years, and mostly properties that are fixer upper. So yeah, the seller they cannot sell it in a normal way, so they use seller finance. So we can fix up the property and then do it like a fix and flip, or hold it on for 5 years and then they get their money. But like a 20 or 30 year is not very common here.
Now, in fairness, 20, 30 year seller financing is also not super common. Typically, we'll get somewhere between, our sweet spot is probably 5 to 8 years. But 5 to 8 years is plenty because for a variety of reasons. The main reason is that a lot of people pursue seller financing because they're not in the position to get financing themselves in their entity's name. Well, after a year of seasoning, by demonstrating to a lender that you can pay on time on this note, you now have what you need to get bank financing if you want that. So if you're using seller financing as a vehicle to ultimately get bank financing, it's perfect for that. And you only need about 6 months to a year of seasoning for most banks will consider what you're looking to do. In our case, because we don't like banks, generally speaking, we could either seller finance that deal and then transition into private money, seller finance that deal, and then at the end of the time, sell the deal entirely and just cash out. So the fact, I mean, a seller finance term less than 3 years is problematic, but anywhere between 3 years and about 8 years is plenty of time for most people to get done what they need to get done. And so we'll happily do deals like that. Let's kind of circle back to when I first talked about how we structured our financing. When we first started doing our deals, we specialized in lease purchase. So we were typically, my preference is to work with tenants who ultimately want to own the property. That's my favorite thing to do. And so if I can find a tenant who wants to buy property but might need a year or two to get in position to qualify for a loan, then a 3-year seller financing arrangement gives me all the time I need to give that tenant the time that they need to get into a position where they can qualify, at which point they would buy the property from me and I'd pay off the financing. So 3 years is plenty of time. More is better, but 3 years is plenty of time if you're working with somebody who really is being diligent about improving their credit so that they can qualify for a loan. And because especially now we're in the part of the cycle where interest rates are heading back up. They were artificially low for a very long time in the U.S., and now they're heading back to normal. I mean, people say, "Oh, 6% interest rates." Well, 6% is normal. That's not high. That's the way they're supposed to be. 3% is abnormal. And in the 70s, people were looking at 12%, 18% interest rates. So my point is that it's becoming more difficult for people to qualify for loans. So if you offer a tenant the opportunity to buy the property that they're living in or that they're going to consider living in, you're going to get people beating a path to your door. And if that's the case, if you can find the best of those people who might need only a year or two to establish themselves so they can qualify for a loan, then they're happy because they get to buy a house. And in this market where rents are continuing to go up, being able to own a house is a big deal. We're happy because we get to sell a property to an owner-occupant, well, to someone who will ultimately become an owner-occupant. But in the meantime, we'll take care of that property like it's their own, because it's going to be at some point. Yeah. They tend to be better quality tenants. And when we sell it, there is no negotiation. There is no inspection because they've been living in it for the last 2 or 3 years. Anything that's wrong with the property at this point, they did it. So they're there. And there's no, and the agents in the audience may not like this part, but there's no commission because we're selling direct to the seller. So my favorite thing of all is to work with people who are looking to ultimately own, but may need a year or two. And even subject to is perfect for those kinds of folks because it gives me as the buyer of the property time to give them the time to qualify for a loan to buy the house. So I'm okay with only getting 3 years if I can find someone who only needs 2 years to qualify. So it can work really, really well in those circumstances. We've done a ton of those. That's pretty much how we got started. And then you have a happy now owner who was a tenant who has an opportunity to own a house. The seller that sold it to you got their loan paid off, so they're happy. We got money on both sides, so we're happy. So everybody wins in a transaction like that. And you have a new homeowner who's now proud of their house and hopefully going to add to the tax base for that county. So everybody, in a situation like that, everybody does win.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
I'll just make one other quick comment. And I know I don't want to run too far over, but I want to say this about seller financing. It is rarely the case that seller financing is presented to us by the seller. In fact, hardly ever. When the seller is talking seller financing, it's almost always because there is a problem with the house or with the financing. We're typically coming to situations where the seller isn't really considering seller financing, and we never use the word seller financing. We simply ask them, look, do you have big plans for the proceeds? If the seller is going to sell this portfolio, let's say, of 10 properties at 100,000 each, if they're going to sell that portfolio and buy a big, huge yacht, then seller financing is not going to work because they need the money. Or if they're going to sell that portfolio and buy more property, then they need that money. But if they don't have a really good, that was my power warning. If they don't have a really good use for the money, then it's almost a crime in my mind not to try to arrange seller financing because you're doing them a service. If I can pay them 3% when they would normally get less than 1%, that's a huge win for them. And so they're far better off taking my seller financed offer than getting all the cash, sticking it in a bank account, letting it sit there and languish at below market interest for a year or two. So we structure seller financing with willing sellers, but rarely do they suggest it. We're almost always the ones proposing it to them, and we propose it to them as a win for them. There are also some tax benefits because if you sell $1 million portfolio in that year, you
all of capital gains.
Yeah, exactly right. So this way you get to spread that out a little bit. So there's some huge advantages to doing what's effectively an installment sale to the seller, but a lot of investors are reluctant or uncomfortable making the offer for seller financing because they don't know how to make that transition. We make those offers all the time because we see the benefits to the seller, of course, and to us as well.
Mm-hmm. So you use that skill set of creating those seller financing offers, and then now you have your business wholesaling those deals to investors, foreign investors,
Exactly right.
or domestic investors.
So what I was going to say is that, except now I can't talk with my hands. What I was going to say is that, so yeah, we will. Our preference is to buy as much as we can seller financing, and then keep some for ourselves. And what we can't keep for ourselves or don't want to keep for ourselves, we'll do what's called a wraparound financing. We'll wrap that seller financing and create a new seller finance note and make that note available to the investor. So, for example, if we can get 3% financing from the seller, we can certainly pass that on to the investor, but we don't have to because market is 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 for an investor loan. So even if we offered 6, it's still way better than what that investor is going to be able to get from anyone else. And it provides us with a spread between what we're paying to our seller and what we're receiving from our investor. So we might take that 3% financing that we were able to get, wrap it, and make it available to a new investor at 6%. And then we typically will bump up the price a little bit. So we're making money at least 3 ways. One, on the delta between the down payment we're collecting from the investor versus what we're paying to the seller. That's one. 2 is the spread between the monthly payment we're collecting from the investor versus what we're paying to the seller. And then it says an aside, we typically, when we structure seller financing, we have in the past been able to structure seller financing such that we pay, our payment is 100% principal. So let's use the example we gave before, $10,000 down on a $100,000 property, $90,000 balance. We may pitch to the seller, hey, how about if I pay you $100 a month for the next 5 years, and then whatever the balance is at the end of those 5 years, we'll just pay that off. If they say yes to that, if that $100 is being used to reduce the principal balance every month, then that's a zero interest loan, right? So we just secured ourselves a zero interest loan for the next, let's say, 5 years on that $90,000 balance. So if you get zero interest loans, you can price it however you want because anything over zero is profit for you.
Yeah.
So we have done zero interest loans before. But the other thing I wanted to point out is when we typically sell to investors, we're typically selling interest-only payments. So while our balance with the seller is going down by $100 by this example every month, our balance with the investor is not budging at all because they're paying only interest. So the same balance that's there today, if we do a 5-year note, will be the exact same balance 5 years from now because they're only paying the interest on that debt, not the principal. So when they do cash this off, let's say 5 years down the road, when the investor pays us and then we can pay off the seller, the balance that we owe to the seller is going to be diminished by, $1,200 times 5. So what's that? $6,000.
Yeah, so you get the equity.
And the balance we have with the investor will be the same as it was day one that we closed, which is the same as it was. So we get paid a third time at the closing on the spread between what we owe the seller versus what the investor owes us. So yes, seller financing from a wholesale standpoint is hugely powerful because most wholesalers wholesale cash. They buy cash, they sell cash, and that's fine. Makes perfect sense. But if you can buy with financing, wrap that financing, and then offer that financing, that's a far superior structuring for deals because most buyers would much rather buy with financing. That's not non-recourse, no bank involved, no junk fee, all the same benefits that we talked about before. Yeah, easier, faster. We can close a seller finance transaction in a week and a half. Most banks take a month and a half. Even hard money takes about 45 days to close. So we can close faster than any bank or hard money lender. We don't care about it. All the things that make seller financing beneficial, we get to use those benefits, reap those benefits when we buy, and then offer those benefits to the investors when we sell. And not surprisingly, our favorite community of investors to sell to are overseas investors because they don't have access to this financing. Yeah. And the interest, the terms that they're offered, as you I'm sure well know, for buying U.S. real estate and not being a U.S. citizen are awful. 25% down, ridiculously high interest rates, and lots of paperwork. And so we can skirt all of that with seller financing.
Yeah, you go around it.
Exactly right. So that's why I'm a huge fan of seller financing, both for myself and for investors who typically aren't able to access the loan programs that U.S. citizens are, which are my favorite people, overseas investors.
Awesome. Yeah, we have to talk also ourselves on maybe getting a deal.
Absolutely.
So we're getting to the last part of the podcast. I wanna go to the deal deep dive. So like just pick a deal, maybe your first deal or the last deal or a special deal to you, and I'm gonna shoot some questions towards that, and you can answer those. So what kind of property was this deal?
So let's use as an example the deal that we just did in Tulsa. So this was a 3-2 single family house, single story. I want to say it was brick. I think it was all sides brick, but at very least brick face. But beautiful house. I mean, nothing special, but a nice rental property in a nice neighborhood. Definitely a solid B neighborhood.
And yeah, then the question is, how did you do the financing? But I guess it's a seller financing deal.
Yep.
And so where did you find the deal? So how did you get it?
So my favorite strategy for finding great deals, and I apologize for the movement on the phone, but I got to hold this thing here, is a strategy that I call tired landlord. I didn't invent it. It's been used. We've been using it since the beginning. It's to identify landlords who aren't getting paid by their tenants and approach those landlords to try to buy their properties. And this property was a landlord that had an eviction filed in Tulsa. My JV partner approached her and said, "Hey, look, we're looking to buy properties. Do you have anything that you're looking to sell?" She said, "Yep, I got 14 properties. I'm eager to sell them." We're up to we just finished, this is number 4. So we have 6 more to go of her portfolio. And so we found her using that strategy. It is my favorite because, especially right now, there are lots and lots of landlords who are in their 70s and 80s who are ready to retire and who just want to be out.
Yeah. Okay. And for how much did you buy it, and did you negotiate?
So the JV partner negotiated it. He bought it for, we ended up buying it for 76 with 15,000 down at 3%. And in retrospect, I probably should have just kept that deal myself. But we ended up not keeping that deal. We ended up selling it to an investor. We did the wraparound and sold it. But we could have easily kept that deal ourselves. 15,000 down on a $76,000 house at 3%.
Wow.
I think the cash flow, if we had kept it, I think the cash flow would have been about, I don't remember exactly, but it was the cash on cash return was at least 11 or 12%. Let's put it that way. And
for a long-term rental.
For a long-term rental. Now, and that's a good point to make, is that for a long-term straight rental, as I mentioned to you, my preference is actually lease purchase. So when I do a lease purchase deal, I'm commanding higher than market rents, getting a better than average quality tenant, and I'm commanding upfront non-refundable earnest money. So in a deal like this, I would have probably looked for $3,000 in non-refundable earnest money, which will ultimately be the down payment for my tenant that's going to buy this property. Ultimately buy this property, but they pay the $3,000 in lieu of a security deposit, with the understanding that when they get ready to buy, we're going to show their loan officer that they paid us $3,000 in certified funds, but that if they don't buy the house, they're not getting that money back. Mm. And so $3,000, if you run the numbers, it's pure profit, and we get to pocket that now, but it sends the cash and cash return through the roof because you're collecting all that money up front, and it's an extra $3,000 on top of whatever your normal rent would be. So it takes like 11, 12% deals and makes them 15, 16% cash and cash return deals. Wow. I'm also starting to look at midterm rentals. Right now, we've been talking primarily about long-term rentals, which are fine, but there's a market for 1 month, 2 month, 3 month rentals for folks who need that. In fact, we're kind of those people now who need a place to stay for a month, fully furnished, and are prepared to pay a premium for that, so that the 12, 13, 14% cash on cash return actually goes up to, in some cases, 1.5 to 2x on that number when you're looking at midterm rentals. So I'm starting to, especially in markets like Tulsa and Atlanta, starting to look at the midterm rental market as a way to juice my returns. But even if you just did straight vanilla long-term rental, this one would perform like a champion.
Wow. Sounds like an amazing deal.
Yeah, it was a great deal. My only regret now, in retrospect, is I probably should have kept it for myself. But there'll be more. I mean, she's got 6 more properties to sell at least. So.
Okay, Mitch, like, great story. I got the last questions for you. So what's your favorite real estate book?
Yeah, that's a tough one. But because of what I said before about the pain that I suffered by not knowing my financials, I've got to plug what every real estate investor needs to know about cash flow by Frank Gallinelli. It's pretty much it should be the textbook for understanding how to run your numbers, what they mean, how they interrelate to each other. So for me, that's something that every investor should be studying, because we tend not to focus on the numbers, and the numbers are what will save us.
Okay, and your favorite business book?
That was a tough one. But I'm a big fan these days of Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference. It's a negotiating book, but it turns on its head a lot of what a lot of us were taught about how to effectively negotiate. I think it's a great place for people to start to look at things differently when they have to negotiate deals.
Cool. We'll check that out.
Awesome.
And do you have a last tip for the listeners, especially for people that are just starting out with real estate investing? Do you have something, as a real estate veteran, do you have something to say to them?
I think I've said it. I think I am the case study. I am the poster child for what happens if you don't pay attention to your numbers. And that's both on the downside and the upside. I think the seller financing is all about numbers. The thing I love most about seller financing is I can sit with a spreadsheet and create $10,000, $20,000 worth of value without lifting a hammer, turning a screwdriver. And so some investors fix houses. I fix financing for houses, and it's far more lucrative, and I can do it from anywhere in the world. So yeah, I would encourage people to master the numbers, because the numbers are where the real value is in this business. The wealth is created through the numbers, not by fixing houses and painting walls. So that'd be my biggest recommendation for folks. I don't know if it's appropriate for me to talk about here, but I love having people reach out to me. So I'm on LinkedIn. The best place to reach me is not Bigger Pockets. Bigger Pockets and I had a little bit of a falling out about 4 or 5 years ago. So I can't respond to people if they message me, and I can't friend, or whatever the equivalent is, join other people on Bigger Pockets. So my recommendation is people reach me on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, and introduce themselves. I love making new contacts around the world, and so it would be beneficial for all of us if we could build our networks together.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Mitch, for sharing your story here on the podcast. And if people want to reach out to you, you can find you on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. I will put a link in the video. So if you want to buy a seller financing deal in the United States, go to Mitch, and he can help you out. Okay, thanks a lot, Mitch, and awesome to have you here.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Aldo.
Okay.